Okay. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a detailed look at sport fishing in the Atchafalaya River Basin. As Assistant Secretary Ryan said, this is mostly geared towards recreational fishing. We are going to talk about some of the environmental implications of why the basin is as tricky as it is as far as water quality and things like that. So I'll go through here. As far as our question format, again, what we were going to do is we have a microphone on that table over there, and whenever I finish, we will take whoever wants to come up and ask questions. We will do our best to answer those, and then our Jeff Sibley will give our presentation on La Trip. But okay, here we go. So again, welcome, both recreational and professional anglers, commercial fishermen, craw fishermen, any and all user groups of the Atchafalaya Basin. We're very glad to see you guys out here tonight. What do you all want to see in the basin? And that's good catches. At least that's what we think you want to see is good catches. Good catches of bass, good catches of sac-a-lait, crappie, good catches of brim, bluegill, bull brim, big nice slab sac-a-lait, big nice catfish. Take your grandkids out there, take your kids out. That's what we think that y'all want to see. So what do we, as fisheries biologists for LDWF, what do we want for the Atchafalaya Basin? And the answer is very simple. It's the same exact thing. We take pleasure, like I mentioned, at these creel surveys, when I see you all coming off the water and you've got your grandkids with you and everybody's smiling and faces are beaming and the kids are just ecstatic because they caught their first catfish, first bass. That's awesome. We love it. So that's exactly what we want too, is for good catches and crawfish traps that are loaded down with 3-4 pounds per trap. That's what we want. The same thing that you guys do. Okay, we're going to start off by just simply talking about what our strategy statements for the Atchafalaya Basin fishery are. And simple enough, the recreational strategy statement is that we manage sport fish to provide the greatest opportunity to catch and harvest a limit of fish, while also ensuring a sustainable population for tomorrow's generation and the generation after that. The commercial strategy statement is that commercial species are managed to provide a maximum sustainable yield that does not contribute to declines in future populations. From a biological perspective, so this is more on the opinion side, but from a biological perspective, the Atchafalaya Basin is a good fishery, but it's not a trophy fishery, and it's never going to be a trophy fishery. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. The Atchafalaya River Basin is not a lake. It's not a reservoir. It's an overflow swamp from the Atchafalaya River. It's always been and it's always going to be a swamp. But a swamp fishery can be very, very good at times because it's shallow, meaning it warms up real quickly. It's nutrient rich because of all the leaves and the Mississippi Atchafalaya River water that comes from 2/3 of our country. It's got a lot of fertilizers. So it's very nutrient rich water. It's very shallow and warm, and therefore it's highly productive. But the limiting factor with a swamp is always going to be dissolved oxygen. So just like our incredibly productive coastal marshes that we have, they can be loaded with food or forage in the sense of a predatory fish. They'll be loaded with forage at times, but they also often have bad water draining out of them. And when the oxygen crashes, that's when you can have fish kills or other aquatic animal die-offs. And so basically what we're promoting from the Atchafalaya Basin is that we want you to be able to go and catch you a nice stringer of fish, a nice mess of fish, but we're not going to see this 16-pounder like they caught at Bussy Break. That's never going to happen. Now we're going to address some of the recent complaints that we heard about the Atchafalaya Basin, and I'm going to try my best to address each one of those as we go through this presentation. And if we get to the end and you feel like I haven't hit on any of that enough, or you still have questions, feel free to ask. One of those, the fishery as a whole, is basically in decline. The increased fishing pressure has led to the depletion or overharvesting of the resources. That fish catches are down, both average and big fish catches, as well as tournament weights. Crappie and brim catches down as well. The need for restocking. There's been questions about putting a minimum length limit or slot limits or lowering creel limits to help out with the fishing. And then there's been some discussion about specific areas being in significant decline. All right, so most of the data that we're going to be discussing and looking at here in a few minutes comes from our LDWF inland fisheries water body management plans. And there's a website right there. I know nobody's probably going to try to write that down, but we do have a QR code at the end if you want to scan that, if you're interested in. There's a ton of information in there. But basically, the Atchafalaya Basin Management Plan was first written in 2009 by my predecessor, Mike Walker, and it's been updated ever since. I've updated it every year since 2014. We have two versions of the plans. The Plan A is going to be a very comprehensive history of water body, talking about Captain Shreve all the way back to, Old River Control Structure, the building of that, the harnessing of the river, blah, 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 hydrological changes, management issues, aquatic vegetation control, regulations, fish kills, our biological sampling, stocking, creel surveys, and maps of features within the water body. The Plan B version is where most of this data is going to come from, in that it's recreational species evaluations with information for each of those species, like the numbers that have been stocked, when we tested the genetics of some of those stocked fish, age and growth studies, creel survey, as well as some trip ticket data for commercial species, habitat evaluations, and then problem discussions, corrective actions, and recommendations, literature cited if you want to follow up and do more research later on, et cetera, and maps and stuff. All right, so our first chart we're going to look at here, this is largemouth bass catch per unit effort from electrofishing in the Atchafalaya River Basin. I'll go ahead and start and say we only electrofish in the fall. A lot of our water bodies here in Louisiana, like Jeff's water bodies up in North Louisiana, Monroe and Minden offices, they can electrofish in the spring. But in the Atchafalaya Basin, because we have the flood pulse that's coming from the Mississippi River, and then 30% of that comes down the Atchafalaya, the river levels are too high. And so when you have a ton of water, obviously fish are displaced. And so your efficiency is much, much lower. So we could go out there and shock all day and only come up with a few fish. But when the waters go down in the fall and the river concentrates, that's when it's much more efficient and we can see numbers a lot better. So when I mention electrofishing in this presentation, it's always referring to fall electrofishing. Okay, so anyway, these are estimates of relative abundance of bass that were collected per hour. It's expressed as catch per unit effort, CPUE. I'll mention CPUE going forward. As you can see on the chart, it's highly variable from year to year, extremely variable. The average number estimated is about 64 fish per hour is what we get each year. The different sizes are on there. So each color represents a different class of fish, the substock class, which is going to be an average of 4.6 inches, less than 1/10 of a pound, and then stock, quality, and preferred. So as you can see, the stock size fish and the quality fish are pretty much the main component of the bass population in the basin. There's not a lot of preferred bass out there. As you can see, there's just not a lot of big fish. So those 16-inch, 15-inch, 16, there's just not a lot of those ever. But you can follow some interesting trends, though, with some of this data, in that if you remember Hurricane Gustav from 2008, 2009 was a very low sampling year because we didn't get a lot of fish from that year. But look at the rebound from 2010 and 2011. We had huge surges in the bass populations. And we saw that at the creel surveys too. A lot of people were catching a lot of fish. And we were seeing a lot in our electrofishing because that's that hurricane response, the post-hurricane response after a big fish kill. 2015, we had another spike in data, which is most likely coming from a lag in 2012. We had several events in 2012. There was a drought that fall, as well as Hurricane Isaac that had a relatively decent fish kill that happened in the Atchafalaya Basin. If you notice basically the last 6-7 years, it's below average. So for some of you guys are saying, man, the fishing out there is not average, it's below average. You're right. And that's what our sample data is showing, that you are correct. It is below average. And there's been several factors that have come into play on this. We've had droughts. We've had, starting from 2016 through 2021, we had high river levels, very, very high river levels. And 2019 being the year, if you remember, that the highest flood duration in the history of the Army Corps, days in flood stage, whatever the terminology was. But when you have those events like that, where it stays flooded for so long, when the back swamps stay flooded into late June, July, and even going further, you've got to remember that atmospheric temperatures are getting into the 90s, getting close to 100 degrees. That water temperature is warming up too. So in late when we were out in late May, even in the basin down by me at Point, you're seeing water temperatures that are already 85, 86, 87 degrees in late May. So when that water gets that hot, there's a direct correlation, meaning you can exactly see as water gets warmer, it holds less oxygen. As it cools down and gets cold in the winter months, there's more oxygen. So you will hardly ever see a fish kill in the winter months. But in the summertime, as the hotter it gets, the less oxygen there is available. So that's why we have these fish kills in the dead of summer and et cetera. So the point of that little aside right there was to say that when we have those years with really, really high water, it's not good for the fish. Bass and crappie do not like that type of extreme high waters. If they had their preference, it would be a reservoir situation where the water stays stable, the same height all year. But obviously with the Atchafalaya Basin, that's not the case. Yes. That happened in 2013. In June of 2013. June of 2013 is when we removed it went into effect in 92 in September. The commission announced the emergency declaration and it stayed in place until June of 2013. Thank you.
2011 and 2016. Can you tell us what the river level was, the Atchafalaya Future Road in those years, what it got to? Because I know that was the different water years. 2011, I believe it went to 22.8 or 23.2 or something like that, Future Road. In 2016, it went above 18 feet. I was positive it did. So you had a significant high water, and you had a lot more current that was, replenishing your fishery, serving your fishery well.
That very well, they all play together, Jody. All those factors do play together. And you're right, 2011 was that super flood year where all the Mississippi River pieces went into place to try to keep everything from flooding. And 2016, I do believe was a high, but I do not have the Butte-LaRose gauge levels with me. I can get you that information though. Okay, moving on. And we will try to keep questions to the end just because we're recording and to try not to get too deviated here. Okay, our next chart here is largemouth bass proportional stock density and relative stock density from electrofishing. So basically, these are indices that describe length frequency data. Sorry, I got tongue tied. Length frequency data. So the proportional stock density compares the number of fish that you have of quality size to the number of fish that are of stock size. So again, if we remember, we'll go back. We're looking at quality and stock. The quality being about 13-inch fish, the stock being about 10-inch fish. So basically, the area that's shaded in blue, that's the ideal range that you would want your proportional stock density numbers in. That means you have a balanced bass population. If numbers are higher than that, then you have a population of larger bass. If it was below that, you would have a population of smaller bass. And then the red shaded area, that's going to be what the relative stock density. And the definition of that basically is the percentage of bass that are over 8 inches, but also the ones that are going to be 15 inches or longer. So that's the preferred fish, again, preferred size class. And essentially, again, the PSD values of between 40 and 70 generally indicate a balanced bass population. So you can see up there on the data, we had essentially 10 of 18 years. This is an 18-year data set from 2005 through 22. 10 of those 18 years do show that we had a balanced bass population. For the RSD, the larger fish value indices, 7 of 8 years show a balanced bass population. That's obviously less because we just don't have a lot of big fish in the Atchafalaya Basin. Oh, I went the wrong way. Moving on. This right here, this is the statewide largemouth bass mean relative weights. So what does that mean? Basically, this is a body condition index that represents the availability of forage, of food that's available. How many groceries do these fish have to eat? It's defined as the ratio of the weight of an individual fish that we just collected to the weight of a standard fish of the same weight. So our entire database, we have what we would call a standard fish, the average of everything. And then we're looking at fish just from the Atchafalaya Basin. And basically what we see is this first table on the left-hand side, that's quality fish. And again, I'll remind, that's about the 1.5 pound, 13-inch bass. The other table is going to be the preferred bass. So again, that's the larger ones. That's the fish that are about 2.5 pounds. Essentially, the Atchafalaya Basin is the best in the entire state. What this table shows is that's all of the this is all the studies, age, growth, and mortality studies that have been done statewide on there's 35 studies that have been done on 30 water bodies, meaning 5 of those water bodies have had multiple studies. The Atchafalaya Basin is one of those. We've had 2 age, growth, and mortality studies that we'll talk much more about in a minute. But basically, the Atchafalaya Basin has the best body condition index of every water body in the state. And it's because of those football bass, like you guys see. There's just big, nice, chunky bass that we catch out there. The 2009 through 11 study ranked 3rd in the state. And again, that's the quality. The preferred table is on the right-hand side. You can see that the Atchafalaya Basin was 2nd and 3rd in those categories. In the other categories of the fish sizes, there was, again, the basin was 1st in the stock size and then 6th in the substock size. But it basically indicates that we have the body condition is very good for Atchafalaya Basin fish. That's the take-home message from this slide. Okay, moving on from the data for a little bit, we're going to talk about the history of bass regulations in the basin, as this gentleman pointed out earlier. So pre-1991, there was still, before kind of specific regulations went in place, our department still looked at bass. There was still research being done, but basically the statewide regulations at that time were no size limit and a 15-fish creel. In 1991, it was reduced from 15 fish to a 10-fish creel. August of 1992, I'm sure some of you guys will never forget, Hurricane Andrew made landfall just southwest of Morgan City as a low-end Cat 3. It hit the basin straight up the gut pretty much and killed an estimated 200 million fish, of which 5 million were estimated to be just largemouth bass. So it pretty much decimated the fishery. Because of that, there was a huge public outcry of y'all got to do something, and nobody in this department had really ever seen anything like that before either. And so September 92, the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission passed an emergency declaration of 14-inch minimum on bass. And the intent on that was to allow the surviving fish, because even though a fish kill comes through and wipes out a ton, there are always some that make it.
It's great to see a room full of this many people, passionate anglers, passionate outdoorsmen, commercial fishermen. It's great to see people involved. That's what we're here for. We have those same passions. It's the reason I do this for a living is because I was bit by the fishing bug as a young person. Figured out real quick I wasn't going to be able to win tournaments, so I better figure out another way to make a living at this. Kind of ended up here, but so it's great to see this. We want the same things that y'all want. We want to see these places excel. We're not trying to work against it. And so what I'm going to talk to y'all about is mainly directed towards tournament anglers. It's a project we're getting going. And so it's kind of a narrow scope thing, but it's a way you can help. Lots of folks have asked, what can we do? Hey, this is a way, this is some of these holes in the data we can plug. Before I get going on that too much though, just going to challenge y'all. A lot of folks in here that have learned or have an open mind and are researching on their own. Look up eutrophication. It's the aging process of a water body. All water bodies do it at various levels. Lakes and reservoirs that I have in my part of the state, we experience it with it too. The Red River starts and comes through my area there that I have to deal with. We got a lot of sediment loads and stuff, but a floodplain system like the Basin or a coastal marsh or a river system is far more complicated than a reservoir. So these same problems are happening everywhere, just at varying scales. So you're not alone in some of that stuff. So just kind of give you my background. I've been working in that part of the state for almost 20 years now. I grew up in Livingston Parish. I cut my teeth fishing Lake Verret and the spillway. I'm still going to call it the spillway, Atchafalaya Basin, whatever you want to call it. I fished it pre-Andrew. I fished it in the recovery time of Andrew for a number of years. I watched those fish grow through and become 14, 15, 16-inch fish, and then it kind of plateau and fall off again. So I've seen it, part of that stuff. like I said, I may live in the north part of the state now, but when they asked me about doing this and they said it was about the Basin, I'm like, all right, that's my stomping ground. So I hadn't been on it a long time. I'm hearing names and stuff going, yeah, I remember that where that is, but I've had to flush some of that out of my mind to learn names of places up there. So, but the biggest thing of this is there's some huge questions that we as fisheries managers have to answer. And we've talked about a lot of them, and the habitat issues are complex as all get out. And habitat for a fish is also water quality. So those things are very, very complicated and often cover multiple states and countries and all these things. And some of them, quite frankly, may or may not be solvable, but they're certainly on a very big scope and things that make you just blow your head trying to come up with it. So sometimes we try to get back in the dirt of it. I worked in a hatchery before that, and that's just farming, raising fish and to stock them out. It's just another form of raising a garden. So one of the things that my staff and I came up with is this LaTrip program. It's the Louisiana Angler Annual Tournament Report and Information Project. It is similar to other states. We are collecting tournament data to plug in some of these holes that exist in our data. And I'm here today to kind of talk to some of you guys and hopefully get some more participation in that program. We'd love to have as many clubs as we can. I don't want to hear about, well, y'all don't know about this. Well, help me know about it, So I'm going to run through some of this, and some of this I'm going to skip for the sake of time since we've been in here so long. But just I already hinted at this, and just so I can embarrass myself, yeah, the short, skinny guy on the side, that's me. Those fish were caught at the mouth of Crackerhead Canals on Lake Verret about 1991. It was I remember the day quite well. So I spent a lot of time in those places. There are these huge questions in fisheries management, and we hear the same complaints in my part of the state of, well, we used to catch those fish. It was so much easier before. And I'm not going to dive off too much into these, but there's a lot of things have changed, even outside of habitat problems in the basin. Catch and release, changes in angler tendencies, live scope, all these things have hit the scene. And some of those questions are real big and real hard to answer. And it takes a long time of collecting a lot of data to be able to even kind of narrow down on what the answer might or might not be. Just to give you a couple of things, and this is just trends. We talked earlier about harvest regulations. This is on slot limit lakes where those were instituted in the early 90s. And what we saw is a tendency among anglers that catch and release is just more prevalent today than it was